I'd like to make some observations about poverty. I hadn't realized until just recently, when I started thinking about this, that I was actually born into poverty. We had no electricity. We lived in a very small house. There was no running water. There was an outside biffy, which we used in the summertime, but there was also a 5-gallon pail within a larger pail that was vented into the chimney. That was our toilet. And I guess we did have a car from as far as I can remember, although probably when I was a baby we didn't, which was 1943. I don't think there was a car then, but for as far back as I can remember, we did have a car of some kind. But my view is poverty is, as long as you're warm and dry and have enough to eat, those are essentials. But after that, I think poverty is relative. As long as you're no worse off than your neighbors, then I don't think you'll feel poor. If everybody's in the same circumstance, and that was the case in the 1930s in the prairies. There's no doubt that people were very, very poor, but people didn't feel poor, especially the children. I'm sure that the parents did, because they knew relative wealth in the 20s, and things got worse in the 1930s. And many of the what were homesteaders, people had mortgages built up on their houses, on their farms, and I'm sure that some of the people who were adults during the 30s did feel poor, but the young children I don't think did, because they were warm, they had enough to eat, and everybody was in the same circumstance. In Saskatchewan in 1980, let's see, what year would that have been? Saskatchewan became a province in 1905, and in 1980, which was the 75th anniversary of the province provided grants to the municipalities if they would prepare history books. In other words, they would ask people in the community to write histories of their family, and they would then have them incorporated into books for each municipality. And that was a great thing. It should have been done 20 years earlier, so that we would have had first-person accounts by the original pioneers. The fact that it was done in 1980 meant that most of the people writing the articles were children during the 1930s. And almost invariably, the reports of these people, when they reported on the 1930 period, are very positive. They did talk about not having a lot of money, but the things that they remembered were the socialization, the baseball games, the picnics at the park, at the river, and the camaraderie that seemed to exist. There were dances in the local school and this sort of thing. And these were positive things which people remembered, even though they were, by almost every account, quite poor. It might very well have been that their parents felt poor because of the increase in their mortgage and the financial pressures that they were put under. But certainly the people who were children or young people during that time period did not feel poor. Also, I've had the opportunity to work in Africa. I lived in Lesotho for 2 years and did other work on a short-term basis in about another 6 countries over a number of years, and then spent also 9 years in Bangladesh. So I did have had, over the course of my career, quite a bit of opportunity to see people who, by almost all accounts, would be very, very poor. But again, the same thing would be true. As long as people were warm and dry and had enough to eat, there's no doubt, especially in Lesotho, people were very, very happy, even though they were, by almost every standard that you could come up with, would be considered to be poor. I'm not sure I can't recall what the World Bank statistics would have been, but certainly Lesotho would have been considered one of the poorer countries. And people were, usually when I went out to a village, I would meet with the chief and some of the senior people in the village. And so these people on a relative basis were the upper end of the people in that community. And they always felt pride in inviting you into their home, even though by North American standards it would be a very humble accommodation. They always seemed to take pride in inviting you into their home and offering you their food. And I never ever got the sense that they felt embarrassed or ashamed of what they were doing. But had they lived in facilities like that in North America, they would have felt very, very poor, because they would have been at the very bottom of the pecking order. And I'm sure that if you go to Hollywood, Rodeo Drive, everybody is very, very wealthy, but the person living in the smallest house on Rodeo Drive probably feels a little bit of social pressure, even though in absolute terms they've got a great house and a great facility, a great way of living. It's as they say, it's more a relative thing. This occurred. I remember meeting a fellow in Pakistan. I traveled around the world when I was right out of university, and I got tripped up and got quite muddy, fell into really a mud hole, and so this fellow came to my rescue and invited me to come to his house to get cleaned up. And as it turned out, he was a flagman for the railway, and part of his job gave him access to a building which was his house, because he had to give signals to the train, and so he was provided with a house right along the railway track. And of course you get talking about what things are like in Canada, and he expressed the fact, as you might expect, that it would be nice if he could go to Canada. But in reflecting on it, in Canada he probably would have been at the lowest end of the pecking order in terms of his standard of living, and he would have felt poor in Canada. But in Pakistan, even though his absolute living conditions were very, very poor, he felt reasonably well off. He had a nice house, relatively speaking, and because he had a job, he was able to get enough food. And so he was somebody who would be well regarded in his community. And I'm almost sure that had his wish come true, that he could have gone to Canada, that there's a good chance, because he wasn't particularly well educated, a pretty good chance that he would have been at the bottom of the pecking order, and he would have been felt quite poor.